So let's welcome Dr. Kaminski.
Thanks, Matt. I appreciate that. It's always a pleasure to be here, Rocky Mountain meeting. It's actually good to be back. I was here in 2019 when the meeting was in Phoenix. Had a chance to visit with one of my former students who works for the Arizona Diamondbacks during that weekend, and had a really fun night. We actually went to the baseball game. I think most of the RMATA was invited too. So I was supposed to be here in 2020, and we all know what happened then. It's kind of weird. ServPro, which some of you know, is a restoration company. They've had a motto or slogan, like it never happened. I don't know about you, but this past month has been like in that in Delaware. Early March, all of a sudden, we took our masks off and we went about our life. It's really weird. Although at UD, our administrators still want to have that little bit of control. So believe it or not, our students can wander around on the entire campus, no masks at all. But when they come into the classroom, we have to have masks. I have to, and our students have to have masks on. Are you serious? Anyways, of course, when you fly, which I did yesterday, multiple times over the last few months, it's in place as well. Anyways, happy to be here. And it's just good to see everybody's faces again, to be quite honest with you. A special thanks to Alicia Cohen and her committee members and the RMATA leadership for inviting me. So let's begin. So just a few disclosures that will impact a little bit of what I talk about here this afternoon or this morning. Over the last few years, been part of the NCAA CARE project. That's a little different hat that I wear in terms of the concussion management that we deal with at UD. But for this talk, I'll mention a little bit about Footbeat, and I'll also mention some of the properties associated with Triax measurement systems. So just want to put that out there. Just a quick first state fact. I was actually talking on Wednesday. I was talking at a small college up in the Philadelphia area, and I shared this slide because not everybody, even in Philadelphia, knows about Delaware. But, tip to tip, only 96 miles. We're the first state, but we're also a very, very small state. And you can see there at its narrowest point, it's only 9 miles wide. UD is actually up in the northern sector of the state. We're in a little town called Newark. The locals let me know as soon as I moved there 20 years ago, it's called Newark, not Newark. It's Newark, New Jersey, Newark, Delaware. So I learned quickly. And then, of course, the lower half actually opens up to the Atlantic Ocean, lower third. So beautiful, beautiful beaches during the summer months. During COVID, it's interesting, a lot of the people who have summer homes, they live there year-round, so traffic's gotten a lot busier. Normally, from Memorial Day to Labor Day, it's chaotic traffic down there. And that's me, if you can picture that. That's my truck. I just back it up. During the week, of course, I don't go down on the weekends, but I do surf fishing. It's just wonderful to just get away and escape the chaos of the world and go down and do some surf fishing. So in terms of the talk today, athletic recovery is really an interesting landscape. And we as athletic trainers are being inundated with a lot of information about athletic recovery that we've got to be able to kind of wade through that landscape to make sure that we're making the right decisions for the student athletes and the constituents that we, are under our control. So I just share that with you. From a historical look, we've known the concept, but really probably not paid too much attention to it. But over the last 10 years, it's become a hot topic, especially in the intercollegiate world and certainly professional sports world, where teams of individuals that make up the sport performance realm are getting together to make these decisions. And at UD, we have a unique setup. Our athletic training staff is part of a bigger picture called the sports performance team. And so we, as athletic trainers, have had to kind of make up a little bit of ground to better understand this concept. And so it's nice to see that in the athletic training realm over the last 10 years, we're starting to see more and more involvement of athletic trainers involved in this process. And certainly our colleagues in strength and conditioning probably have a leg up on us, but that's okay. You know, the sandbox is big enough. We can all play in the sand together. It's interesting, you know, Tom Brady, and you know that he's going to make another comeback, right? So he's, 45 or 46 now, and is going to make another comeback. He's has an arrangement with Under Armour, which they call it the TB12 recovery technology. I'm not sure how much he's actually involved in the technological side of things, but you can see there on his wrist he's wearing one of those Fitbit type devices that will monitor his sleep and recovery. And perhaps no better individual to talk about recovery than this guy. I mean, he's really, you know, recreated the definition of longevity, right? Amazing that what he's been able to do. When we look at factors that affect athletic performance, I think this is a good slide and a good table here to just kind of show you that, you know, there are a lot of things that go into athletic performance. And certainly the health component is where we've taken ownership as athletic trainers, but we've gotten involved in some of those other areas. And it's interesting, you know, the landscape in intercollegiate athletics where I come from has really taken a unique turn, especially over the last 10 years, and certainly at UD. We are a mid-major by all accounts. We are certainly not a Power 5 school at all. But we take that model, and we take that model very seriously. And so we have, you know, part of our sport performance team, we have sports psychologists, we have team physicians, we have nutritionists, we have mental health specialists, we have athletic trainers, we have strength and conditioning equipment folks, all part of that team. And so you can see that what goes into ideal athletic performance, a lot of variables take part. So there's three concepts that I'm just going to briefly talk to you here about this morning. Load, overload, and recovery. Okay? Now, obviously, the focus of this lecture is on recovery, but in order to understand that, we need to understand what load is and what overload is. So load, a stimulus experienced and responded to by an individual before, during, or after participation. That's load. Okay? And it can come in different forms as well. So you can see, you know, they exercise, they experience some load, they go through a recovery process, and it starts over again. Okay? And so that's what's shown there on those graphics. Now, obviously, you know, our concern about load is, okay, could it potentially produce injury? And so we need to be cognizant of that as well. You know, I can remember early in my career, I was certified in 1984, and yeah, a long time ago, I'm old. And, you know, I can remember, you know, football practice 3 times a day, you know, just the grind. It was normal. And our athletes were so broken down. And we'd get up and we'd do it all the next day. It's unheard of today. It's unheard of. And it's interesting because you notice the NCAA, NAIA, et cetera, you know, in terms of scheduling, they've changed things around for scheduling. You know, you used to play back-to-back games, soccer, baseball, lacrosse. Baseball probably still does. Lacrosse, in our sector of the world and country, you know, lacrosse games used to be played, you know, Friday, Saturday, or Friday, Sunday, and then again in the midweek. Now we schedule them once a week just to give the athletes time to recover. So, important. So a variety of external, internal loads, very intuitive. This graphic is very intuitive, okay? It makes sense to you. So, you know, a number of external loads, you can look at it from a physiological or physiological, psychosocial standpoint. And then those turn into internal loads as well. So the athlete experiences some external force, and it creates some internal response as well, okay? And we adapt. You know, athletes will adapt to those loads, okay? The hope is that as they see these loads over and over time, they get better. So their performance level goes up. Okay? So they exercise. Just go back. So they exercise. Let me just see if I can show this. Yeah, this pointer here. So they exercise. Obviously, they get to some point of fatigue, and then there's a recovery period, and they go back out and, over, weeks or probably days and weeks, perhaps months, they improve performance. Okay? Now comes the concept of overload, right? So a load that is excessive or not well managed. So somewhere along the line, the external and internal loads are not communicating, okay? So there's a discrepancy there, okay? There's an unequal state or, equilibrium has not been met, okay? And this results in, you can see, anatomical, physiological, and or psychosocial conditions that can alter performance and lead to injury and illness. I was watching last night, the women's Final Four games. I tune in because one of my former students is the athletic trainer for the South Carolina women's team. And you got to wonder what they're doing today. What are they focusing on? Probably nutrition is important. Some recovery process underway. Yet the athletes are going to go out. They're going to have a mid-afternoon shoot around. Okay, certainly nothing of too intensity. Okay, because they got a big game tomorrow, right? As they do that recovery. Okay. And again, as athletic trainers, I think we are in touch with, some of the medical issues that are associated with overtraining. Okay? So it's often characterized by performance plateau, not improved with the usual rest or recovery cycles. And we see this in our athletics, is that, they kind of reach this plateau. They're not getting any better. And so at UD, our performance team gets together and tries to adjust to try to improve on that. It's important, even at small, little Division I, University of Delaware. Wins are important to us. Just to give you an example, our football coach, he was there for 4 years. Obviously, COVID hit, missed the fall season, but if you remember, in FCS, they actually played last spring. They played an FCS schedule in the spring. Not all teams did, but UD did. Took our team to the Final Four in the FCS championship. Turned around a few months later, we played this past fall, and in December, he was handed his walking papers. Not enough wins to satisfy our board of trustees and our alumni. This is how it works. He's serious. It's incredible, even at University of Delaware. So, wins are important to us. So any chance you can get to make that difference is going to be important. Whether we as athletic trainers like that or not, it's true in all of the environments, especially the sporting environments we work in. And then you can see the different systems that are going to be affected. Cardiovascular, respiratory, hormonal, immunity, yeah, we're going to see that. But our wheelhouse is musculoskeletal injuries, right? So what's the role? Certainly understand medical issues, including sleep disturbances. I can tell you when I first started practicing, I could care less about sleep. I was more worried about, ankle sprains, knee injuries, hip injuries, shoulder injuries. Had no focus on sleep. But in our world now, sleep is very, very important. Okay? Be involved in the management, medical illness. Obviously, we do a great job at that. Age-specific implications, certainly sport. I tell my current students, wherever you land, and if you're sport-specific, if you're just talked to one of my former students today, he's going to get a job at Morgan State, work with the women's basketball team there. All right, he's got to understand the dynamics of women's basketball. It's unique, right? It's different than other sports. Psychological components of overload and recovery, whether we like it or not, it's here to stay. Mental health is very, very important, what we do. Okay? And here comes the collaboration, right? I call it the athletic care network. At UD, we call it the sports performance team. Just basically understanding that. To facilitate those adjustments in training, competitive loads, You got to get coaches involved too. But I think today's coaches, for the most part, are involved in this process. They understand athletic recovery, okay? And it's their ticket to wins and losses if their athletes are performing at top-notch level. So lastly is what we're here to talk about this morning, and that's recovery. So you can see there is the period and the processes during which the body responds to load, right? So our goal is to optimize the physical, physiological, psychosocial adaptations to internal and external loads. So if you remember before from some of the slides that I showed you, that graphic there, that table's not different, right? So it has the physical, physiological, and psychosocial aspects, and then some selected examples of where we as an athletic trainer might become involved in, okay? So again, some of the key components there: aid in reducing fatigue and enhancing performance, and recovery of muscle function is chiefly a matter of reversing the major cause of fatigue and damage. So just, having that understanding. So when we look at the categories of recovery, I've kind of just put it into these three areas. There we go. So immediate recovery, probably not something that we're actively involved with. Okay, and I'll give you an example there. Short-term recovery, probably not. This is what's happening with the individual athletic level. But certainly training recovery, we can get involved with, right? So that's the recovery between successive workouts or competitions. And we're involved with that process. Our athletic trainers on the road, at home, are involved, in between competitions. They're involved with this recovery process. Okay? So getting an understanding of that, I think, is really going to be the focus of what I have remaining to say to you this morning. So I'm just going to share with you some hypotheticals. Sometimes people don't like hypotheticals, but I think these are pretty straightforward. So this first one is just this sub-elite or recreational athlete, right? So 0 represents their baseline. So they go out and they exercise or they work out, gives them some training effort, and then, they slide into a fatigue state, and then they have to have time to recover, okay? And then maybe a period of 24 hours later, they go back and they train again. And the hope is that over time, that training response is improved. So here is the elite athlete. So you notice here on the graphic that, they're training at a much higher level than that sub-elite athlete. But, the period of time in that zone is about the same, okay? And then they fatigue and they have to have a recovery period. And hopefully, they respond to that recovery and get better. And then this third is the kind of the under-recovered athlete, right? So they train, yet they don't recover enough. And we've had those athletes before, we know. And so they're going out, they're just going through the motions. Their training level is much reduced from where it was, and then obviously that opens them up to the potential for injury as well. Okay? We see them in the training room, we see them in our clinical practice, etc. So the hope is that we're able to create an environment of recovery that mitigates that underperformance, and it creates, the best performance possible for them, okay? So that's what's showing here, right? So the dotted line is the elite athlete, the solid line is the sub-elite athlete or recreational athlete, and, the hope is that, their recovery period is ideal, and they're back and they're working at every level. I can tell you, I have several students in the NFL right now. In fact, I have 12 former students who work. I've been at UD now for 20 years. I have 12 former students who are working full-time in the NFL. My first ever got appointed this past week. He became the head athletic trainer for the Minnesota Vikings, Uriah Myrie. It is foremost on the minds of the sport performance team at that level, every athlete having to be at their highest level. So recovery is first and foremost. Drives every decision that they make. Because you figure these guys are making millions and millions of dollars to be on the field every single day. Okay? So hopefully, as athletic trainers and our sport performance professionals get together, this is the hypothetical that we're after. This is the ideal. And I'll leave you with this as we transition into the next phase of my talk. This is a very good issue. This came out in September of 2020. The Journal of Athletic Training. Darren Padua and Jimmy Anati were the guest editors of this issue on training. And this is their editorial to kind of lead off the series of articles that were present in that particular issue. And I took from it three things. Number one, strategies for monitoring, managing training load, and recovery behaviors. Very, very important. We need to understand that as athletic trainers. And so then, as I transition to the next part of my talk, we're going to talk a little bit about that. So we are inundated. You know, your exhibit area is probably pretty small here, but you know, when you go to the big meetings like ACSM, the NSCA, the NATA meetings, there are people that are pushing their wares to you about athletic recovery. You know, you got to swim through that. Those waters are very, very muddy, very muddy. A lot of emerging evidence that in addition to excessive training, reduced training loads also may be problematic as well. You know, we're talking high-level athletes. They need to be up at this level. So undertraining can be detrimental to them as well and produce, especially from a psychosocial standpoint. And the biggest question facing us, what's the most important thing to measure in terms of performance and recovery? How do you assess it? How do you assess it? Okay? So stay tuned. So I'm going to transition into measurement and monitoring, right? And you can see here, due to the multifactorial nature of recovery, which it is, lots of variables you could potentially look at. So I break them down into lab measurements, questionnaires, and measurement systems and wearable technologies. Okay? So plenty of limitations. I do a lot of research with soccer heading. I've worked with U.S. Soccer, where we created a program that looks at youth, teaching youth coaches how to teach their young athletes how to head the ball. You know, in this country, if you're 10 and under, you can't head a ball. At least you're not supposed to anyways, in any U.S. soccer sanctioned event. But in the ages of 11 and 13, you can begin to head the ball. So what we've done is we have measurement systems. We had headband systems that I'll show you here. Then now we're using mouthpiece sensors filled with air, you know. A girl's ponytail hits it, and we're saying that it's coming to our system that as a impact, and it's not. So you see there's a lot of error and variability associated with this process. So nonetheless, the same thing with most of these measurement systems you're going to run into. Okay? A lot of movement artifact, frequency and data sampling. You don't need to understand any of that stuff. You just want the end product, right? You want the end product. You want it to be very reliable and valid. Okay? I was part of a group last week. We were at the University of Pennsylvania, Penn, and it's called the CHAMP group. And so what we're looking at is we're looking at all these sensor systems, in helmet, outside of the helmet, etc., for measuring the stuff. Head impacts, primarily. Of interest to some of us in this room who work with contact or collision sports. And we're just trying to come to some consensus of what really is making sense. And so we spent all last Thursday and Friday, this is what we were doing. A bunch of geeks in a room just like this and just nerded out. And, you know, half the stuff I don't understand. It's biomechanists and engineers. But nonetheless, it's variability in these measurement systems. They are imperfect systems. So when we talk about lab tests, you might be involved with blood tests or urinalysis. Blood tests, you know, blood can show you a lot. I mean, it can tell you a lot. Okay? And so there are plenty of markers that talk about breakdown in muscle, okay? In nerve tissue, in immunity systems, et cetera. So you could do these. The problem with this, especially in our world, very expensive. Very expensive. Laboratory setting, sure, but in our world, practicality, probably not. Okay? And then, of course, urinalysis is a little cheaper, but doesn't tell you as much as some of the blood work would from a laboratory perspective. Okay? What about questionnaires? There's a few out there. The first one there is called POMS. This stands for Profile of Mood States. Okay, so this is getting kind of at this psychosocial aspect of our student athletes. The REST-Q Sport is here. Okay, that stands for Recovery Stress Questionnaire for Athletes. So it talks about both physical and mental recovery. Okay? So we're listening to our patients, right? This is evidence-based medicine 101, right? There's 3 components of that. Best evidence, our clinical expertise, and then the third component is what? Listen to our patients, right? So this is an opportunity for us to get feedback from our student athletes on how they're actually feeling, okay? And then lastly, you can see there the Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Index. So there are tools out there that we can kind of get at various facets or various factors of athletic performance that normally as athletic trainers we wouldn't do. But cheap, effective, and easy to use. Things like perceived exertion are also, we're familiar with that, the RPEs, wellness scales, so muscle soreness, and certainly nutritional guidelines. So, tracking nutrition in our athletes. On the plane here yesterday, I was reading some homeworks from our students that have turned in, our second-year master's students, and one of them is dealing with some nutritional questions that were posed to them. And to a person, it was like, why didn't they all said something, well, we would look at the athlete's diet, and I would pose the question, what would you do? And they've all familiar with these 7-day recalls. I wanted them to get to that. In order to do that, we need to see what our athletes are eating. And probably be an eye-opening experience for most of us to see exactly what they're putting in their mouths. Again, we're not a Power 5 school, so we can't control when our athletes leave. We do have an athletic dining hall for them, but that's for usually just lunch during the day. Okay? What happens? What are they consuming outside of that? We tell them, but maybe not always listening to what we're saying. Of course, there are measurement instrumentation systems that we can look at. At UD, we've teamed with Sparta Science. Some of you in this room may have some familiarity with Sparta Science as well. So the force plate measurement system is looking primarily at this concept called explosion. Okay? And we're looking at injury patterns, et cetera. So our strength and conditioning staff does this. Obviously, VO2 max, very easy to be measured nowadays. You have a treadmill and you have some of these portable systems that do a very good job. Just briefly make mention, myself and my colleague, Dr. Lipton in New York City, he's an MD, PhD, and he works with MRI technology, and we're looking at repetitive head impacts, primarily in soccer players. And one of the things that, been ingrained in our minds over the last, 50 years especially, is the importance of exercise. Exercise is good. So we think that in our soccer athletes, what's happening is they get some benefit from being fit. It helps protect their brain. And we just got awarded a $5 million grant from the NIH to study this for 5 years. So what we're going to do is we're going to assess VO2 max at different points in our athletes and then have them, obviously go out and play soccer and head the ball. And we think there's a mitigating effect of VO2 max and exercise enhancement on mitigating the effects of repetitive head impacts. Not concussion now. Concussion, different story, but repetitive head impacts. So, heading the ball all the time. So stay tuned on that front. Interesting measurement. Obviously, MRI and ultrasound technology, we are much more well-versed on that nowadays. Isokinetic testing, velocity and power, again, the jumping, video analysis, so we work with our coaches on this. And then internal measurement systems. This is just a capsule that actually is used to study heat. So Doug Casa and his group up there at UConn look at, use this technology to look at internal temperatures. And then, of course, the plethora of wearable technologies. Global positioning systems at UD, we've started to do this. We just got a big grant that we're looking in our student-athlete populations. So we're monitoring them all the time. They put this harness on, they go out and they play, and we're monitoring their movements. Okay? Heart rate monitors, heart rate variability devices. I've been reading a lot about stress lately because, needless to say, over the last 2 years, I think it's affected our culture and our people. And heart rate variability holds a lot of promise. And so some of these devices look at heart rate variability throughout the course of the day. Heart rate variability is a good thing. You want heart rate variability, okay? And so stay tuned on that front. I think there's going to be more and more come out on that. Velocity acceleration measurement systems, you'll see that's the TRIAC system that we've used in the past. Motion capture systems, and then obviously one of the big things now are sleep monitors as well. So some of these watch-like bands have heart rate variability, they have sleep monitoring, etc. Obviously a cost associated with them. So what's the role for us as athletic trainers? Components of load, overload, and recovery that are measurable. So those are the things maybe we want to look at. Okay. Further research, yes, 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 yes. I totally agree. Okay. That journal issue in JAT 2020, there's a few good articles and nice systematic review in there. That's only the beginning to try to look at all of these devices that are out there. Okay? Become familiar with the categories, understand the limitations. As I mentioned, a lot of measurement error. They will get better with time. And again, collaborating with our athletic care network to effectively monitor and use, and then make those adjustments. Okay? So that's where we as athletic trainers are going to have a voice in that process. So when we look at intervention strategies, enhancing recovery, we look at training tactics. Obviously, these are some training tactics that we can look at. Periodization, limiting hours of training. I mentioned at the outset how some sport bodies in the United States and the world are limiting the number of competitions during the course of the week. I think the NBA did that a few years ago, where the fans were complaining because the stars were sitting out games because they needed to recover, playing back-to-back games. And so the NBA switched that around because of this, because of the recovery thing. Okay. And then there are active and passive recovery techniques. Okay. We'll talk a little bit about some of those as well. Nutritional considerations. Again, we are who we eat. We are who we eat. And so, I think that I've often said that a lot of things that we do as athletic trainers in terms of our physical modalities and our interventions probably could be enhanced if we looked at the nutritional component as well during recovery, okay? During recovery from injury. So these are some guidelines put forth by the American College of Sports Medicine and the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, looking at the influence of dietary consumption in recovery. And so there's a bunch of recommendations that they make there, very similar to what you see when the NATA puts out a position statement. There's recommendations in that as well. And so they base it on the good science, the good evidence that's available to us. So this just talks about carbohydrates, fluid, protein recovery. I'll share this with you here, and I brought a copy of it, and I'm happy to share this with anyone afterwards. If you want to send me an email, I'm happy to share this with you. At UD, our sport nutrition team gives this to our student athletes each year before the beginning of their competitive seasons. And it talks about the 4 R's of recovery. And you can see there, replenish, rebuild, rehydrate, and rest. Put it in very simple terms for student athletes to understand. And in their world, man, this is all about their world, right? Infographics, something that's short and sweet. Because you don't have too much time with them, right? It's fleeting. They got to get back to their cell phones, right? So if you're interested in that, very good handout. Happy to share it with you and pass that along, because I think it could be something that you might be able to use with your athletes. Mental health considerations, obviously the post-performance phase involves responses to those external consequences and the internal processes that they're going through in terms of recovery. So 3 pathways: sustained involvement, re-engaging, or disengaging from the activity. So, our athletes need to learn that. And so our sports psychology, our mental health professionals at UD, we talk to them about, you played a competition, time to disengage. There's a period right afterwards, good, but it's time to move to the next competition. You can't wallow in what went on, what you did, what you didn't do, etc. So the mental health component, as I mentioned earlier, whether we like this or not, is here to stay. And so if it's here to stay and the bus is moving forward, we need to jump on. We need to better understand that, just for our own sake, just to better understand that. I'm not saying become experts, but better understand that world. Sleep considerations, obviously, athletes generally sleep less than non-athletes, okay? And so it's important that athletes understand how sleep affects performance, recovery, what are some of the factors that are involved in this whole process. This is a good infographic. I snagged this from the group at, the British Association of Sport and Exercise Sciences. A neat little infographic here about, and we share this with our athletes, Athletes think that when they fall asleep at night on their couch with the TV going, that's quality sleep. They wake up 6 hours later and they're ready to go. No. Okay? So again, we try to share with them in their terms something useful, something easy to use, right? Whole body cryotherapy, perhaps. Maybe this is a good segue into my talk. I spoke at EATA this year. The title of my talk was De-iced, and it ties a little bit into recovery, but I'm looking at it from a purely, like a therapeutic modality standpoint. And luckily for me, it was the last day of EATA in Connecticut. Weren't too many people there. But the feedback I got was very good, and so the NATA picked up on it, and so they've invited me back on the Thursday, I think, of the meeting in Philadelphia. But there I'll probably have to wear my suit of armor, because people will be throwing stuff at, what do you mean ice is bad? But this is whole body cryotherapy, and so perhaps if there's a good thing about whole body cryotherapy, maybe it's in recovery. Okay? Expensive for some of these things. And then I just briefly mentioned this, about rice, and if you want to listen in, I think they're going to have me on virtual too during that meeting on that Thursday in NATA. So if you can't make it to Philly, you can always chime in virtually. But I talk about rice and the newer evidence suggesting that both ice and rest may actually delay recovery. Good hardcore evidence that's showing this. Yeah, I'm not sure every athletic trainer wants to hear that, but nonetheless. Gary Reinl, good friend of mine, wrote this book, great book. And so it talks about that. But, another colleague of mine, Chris Bleakley, who's over in Belfast, Northern Ireland, he uses this concept called police, and I like it. They still use ice, but very, very limited in the early stages, mainly as an analgesic. But protection, optimum loading, compression, elevation, I think are important there as well. And then some of our colleagues over in Europe, they use peace and love, and you notice that there's no ice in there at all. If you've ever traveled to Europe, even on European airlines that leave from the United States, to get ice It takes an act of Congress. Really, you know, U.S. Airways, you always give you a glass of ice with your ginger ale or your Coke or whatever. But the Europeans, they look at you like, why do you need ice? So you go over there with an athletic team, try to find ice, right? Best way is to find a way to bring it with you if you can and keep it cold for however long you're over there. Anyways, notice there's no ice there. So peace and love, they use a lot of this. And then in the anti-ice age via active recovery, I think there's a lot to be said for active recovery. I'm not trying to make a commercial here about MarkPro, because there's a number of competing systems. But I think active recovery holds the key in terms of certainly sport injury management and in recovery management as well. Flushing out those waste. And basically what we're doing, folks, is we're attacking a system that is there to begin with, lymphatic system. And if we can energize and enhance the lymphatic system, you'd be surprised. I've been working with a colleague at Penn State. We're looking at to do a study for following concussion, because most recently, anatomists at University of Virginia found that even in the brain network, there is a very intricate system of lymphatic vessels. Well, maybe that's the ticket to recovery from concussion, because we've never done that. So maybe if we can find a way to enhance that lymphatic system to recover from concussion, maybe it will be better off for our student athletes as they come back from concussions. Who knows? Stay tuned, right? So the days of doing this have been, changed by this. You go to Major League Park now to see, they're not icing at all. They are doing this to enhance the recovery. Okay? They're enhancing the lymphatic system. So stay tuned. I think there's a lot to be said for that. Massage therapy, again, gained popularity, feels good, not banned, no known side effects. Whether or not the evidence is still wishy-washy there, whether it works. Our athletes like it, it feels good. Okay? It feels good. It takes time, right? Especially if you as the athletic trainer are doing it. Analgesics, maybe there's a place, certainly help reduce muscle soreness, creatine kinase accumulation. Okay? Stretching, flexibility exercise, we've been doing this as part of normal cool-down routines. Compression garments, certainly most of you are familiar with this, how these work. Okay? Compression modalities, so the recovery pump, the Normatec systems are available. We've got those. Many of you have those devices. Again, helping that lymphatic system to get in there and do its job in a normal fashion. So just enhance that process. And then I'll briefly just show you this, a micromobile compression device called the Footbeat. Some of you may have seen it a few years back in Houston. They had a big show there at the NATA anyways. They had a big booth set up, and maybe some of you used it. But, this is, can you go ahead and just play that video for me? You can see what's happening. When we take a step, we're sitting right now. You are, I'm standing. But when you get up, all that blood's been sitting, pooling as you've listened to this crazy Polak talk to you the last 40 minutes. Okay? Blood's just pooling. Well, when you get up and you start walking, this intricate network, it starts to push that blood back to the heart, okay, via the lymphatic system. And it's a passive system, so it requires muscle pumping, right? It requires muscle pumping. So you can see that the logistics behind the Footbeat makes sense, because we have athletes off their feet all the time, okay, with injuries. So this can enhance that process. So it's another way of enhancing the process. And then, of course, there are these newfangled things, hyperbaric chambers that are expensive to use. Do they work? Maybe. Okay? Infrared saunas, etc. So you can see there's lots of vast landscape to kind of navigate here in terms of these recovery devices. Passive treatment modalities, so, E-stim, mechanical agents such as hydrotherapy, traction, taping, and bracing may enhance this as well. So, as we finish, I just want to put a few concluding thoughts, right? So athletic trainers need to take an active role in the recovery process. That's okay. We can be part of the team, okay? Probably not take ownership like we do with concussion management and other areas of injury, but that's okay. We can be part of this team, and the waters are murky. There's just a plethora of information out there, okay? But trust your instincts. Trust your instincts. Okay, understanding that it's a multifaceted approach to addressing certainly the musculoskeletal, the medical, the psychosocial issues. Okay, collaborating, important, and hopefully I think you've picked that up. And again, the recovery strategies can be cumbersome, okay, but it's best to try to seek out the best available evidence that's out there on those devices. We need to measure recovery. Recovery needs to be measured. What do we decide how do we decide to measure that is the important piece, okay? And make it cost affordable too, okay? So a nice infographic, again, put out by the British Association of Sport and Exercise Sciences here. There's the situation, what's the etiology of performance decline, and then what strategies are we going to use to intervene. So these are available. They're available online. You can get them. You can have them in your training room, have them in your clinic, have them in your practice area. Some other helpful resources, these are just some special communication publications that are out there. So load, overload, recovery, shared some of that. I hopefully tried to just break it down to what I thought made sense for us as athletic trainers. Another review here. A consensus statement, and then a couple websites where they compare sport technology. This is a colleague that's over in France, and another website called gadgetsandwearables.com. So anyways, there's my contact information. I'm happy to share these slides with you, share the infographics. I'm happy to send those along, and happy to answer any questions that you might have of me here this morning. So, thank you.
Yeah, we'll open it up for questions, and I was going to say go to the microphone. You're on top of it. Good job.
All right, thanks, Tom.
Thanks.
So I was wondering if you have any suggestions for educators who are trying to meet the KD curricular content standard specific to biometrics. With so much out there and everything changing so fast, what would you suggest to give students a strong foundation to manage everything that's out there?
Yeah, good question. Start simple. I think they need to have an understanding of some of the wearables that are out there. Fitbit, and I just use Fitbit, but there's lots. And what variables are going to be taken from that? We have a class in our graduate, our second year students take a class looking at different measurement systems throughout kind of the healthcare system. So musculoskeletal ultrasound, x-rays, MRIs, wearable technologies. And I think it's important that our students just have a baseline of some of that information, because again, it comes back to this measurement system. What am I going to use? Okay, so if they've had some exposure to that, I think that's good. So, and like I said, at UD, I benefit from the fact that it's a seamless process. I'm on the academic side, my colleagues on the athletic side, seamless. We all work together. Okay? I know at other institutions that's not necessarily the case. So they have interactions on a day-to-day basis when they're assigned to UD Athletics with our sport performance professionals. Okay? And so that helps that process too. So they gain an understanding of really what's being, the technology that's being used in those other areas.
Thank you.
Yep. Especially the Sparta sports science stuff too, they gain technology, or they gain use of, or introduction to the use of that as well, because they see it in our strength and conditioning facilities. plus the GPS technologies on all of our athletes. So, you know, our athletic training students know that those systems are in play. You know, what's being beamed up to the cloud and then ultimately sent to our sport performance professionals to make sense of.
Any other questions?
Yep.
I have a question in reference. One of my coaches sent me a text the other night about a Q collar. One of the Texas women's basketball players was wearing it, and she was just kind of curious. And I know it's another gadget type thing, and I wonder if you could comment on that.
Yeah, it's interesting. My colleague Dan Watson, who runs our sport performance area for UD Athletics, he got about 4 or 5 of them sent to him because one of our board of trustees knew someone and said, "Oh, we need to use this." So he conferred with myself, my colleague Dr. Buckley, around the CARE project. And, you know, it's one of those devices that's out there, okay? We don't necessarily agree with what they think, the information that they're getting from it. So I would have to say at this time, it's purely speculative whether or not it's working and providing the information regarding brain blood flow that it purports to do. Perhaps in time, more studies will come out and it might show its effectiveness, but it's not something that we're utilizing, nor do we advocate. So that's my response. Hopefully I make it out of here alive. They're probably waiting for me to arrive in Philadelphia, you know. Our colleagues at Cincinnati who developed that.
Thank you for coming, first of all. Appreciate that.
You're
bringing
welcome.
your expertise here. Question for you on the concussion discussion and the VO2 max discussion. Is there research into the partial pressures of carbon dioxide as a factor of the VO2 impact on the concussions?
You know, I'm not very well versed in that area, but I do sense that there is some protective effect. What we found is that in our MRIs of these individuals who play soccer is that we think there's a certain threshold that they get to a certain number of headers or repetitive head impacts throughout their career, combined with their fitness level, which we think is right, and it protects them up to a certain point. And then after a certain point, we start to see changes in their gray matter. And so we've kind of hypothesized that if we can maintain that level of fitness throughout their careers, maybe that will have a long-lasting protective effect. The classic case example, and I spoke to this on Wednesday when I spoke to this group in Philadelphia. Abby Wambach, who good friend of mine, she played for us when I was at Florida. I was at Florida between 1996 and 2002, and I worked with women's soccer there in addition to my responsibilities with academics. And that's when I first started this area of interest with repetitive head impacts in the sport of soccer because I was on the sideline every day, literally tracked headers every single day of our student athletes, practice and games. And I did the math and I did some extrapolation because she had a long time career in the professional level, you know, playing for U.S. national team. And it's probably a low number, but she's probably headed the ball over 10,000 times in her career. Whoa, think about that. You know, woodpecker, they go nuts, right? Probably 10,000 times in a single episode, right? But 10,000 times a human brain that doesn't have the protective mechanism that a woodpecker does? You know, I question. So I've asked her on multiple occasions, come up to New York and we'll scan your brain. No. She's not at that level yet. And I understand. She's functioning fine. She appears to be normal, okay? But she doesn't want to know. But I'm curious. Someone in of her stature, over 10,000 times. But you talk about physically fit. She played at the top level. She was always in terrific shape. So maybe there was a protective, you know, benefit through the years.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? No?
So I tried to make up some time for you. So anyways, it's a pleasure. I just enjoy coming. You know, I kind of, my roots are in this district, because I went to school at Arizona in 1985. I got my degree. Gary Delforge was one of my mentors, so it's good to be back, and appreciate the invitation. Thank you.
Well, on behalf of the RMATA, thank you.